It's called The Art of War. And it's all about a general called Sun Tzu. Now, the book was first translated into the French language in 1772. Interesting date. Just before the banning of the Jesuits. And it was written by a French Jesuit by the name of Jean-Joseph Marie Amiot, and he was the astronomer to the Emperor of China. And a partial translation into English was attempted in 1905. So here was a book, and it was translated into French, and it told the story of this general of the Chinese army more than 800 years ago. Apparently a translation of a legendary general who probably is fictitious and never existed, but nevertheless he's spoken about in many circles, and this book is actually compulsory reading for military generals and in the military schools, even of the United States of America. So it must be very important if it's compulsory reading. So we have to understand. Now the story is about the general whose name is Sun Tzu, and he was the general of the army of King Helu, who is also known as King Hu, and the country was Wu. And it's interesting that this man, of course, spoke fluent Chinese, because he was the astronomer of the Emperor of China. Now, if you go to Japan, there's a massive statue of the general Sun Tzu that you can find there. So he's a prominent legendary figure. Now, on page 490 of his book, The Jesuits, Malachi Martin implies that if a Jesuit writes a book, it is in essence the general of the Jesuits himself who sanctions it in view of the oath of obedience. A Jesuit will only put a book out that represents the view of the general. But a Jesuit can also put a book out that is not only the view of the general, but the writings of the general himself. Are you with me? So this fictitious character may have never existed, Sun Tzu. And it must be an allegory that tells us something. Now, the most brilliant strategist will tell you what his strategy is. They do this in chess, and then proceed to defeat you using the very strategy that is made known in the first place. Then you prove your brilliance beyond a shadow of doubt. Now, the story goes that the king of Wu was in serious trouble because his enemies had surrounded him and was taking one piece of territory after the other away from him. And he had such a problem in his nation that eventually he summoned this great general, or the general came to him and said, I can solve your problem. I can solve your problem for you. And he said, my problem is too great. My problem cannot be solved. The general said, yes, I can solve your problem for you. So let's call him King Hu. King Hu said, how would you solve it? And he said, by raising an army that's invincible, that is so organized, that is so precise, that is so obedient unto death, that it will do anything I command. He said, how are you going to do that in my ragtag nation? He says, I will do it. Give me the opportunity. So the king of Wu thought about it and said, well, I have over 100 concubines. He's somewhat like King Solomon, wasn't he? And he said, all of these ladies of my royal court, if you can take these undisciplined ladies and turn them into an army of discipline within one day, then I will appoint you as my general. And Sun Tzu said to the king of Wu, he said, I will do it on one condition, and that is that I have absolute absolute authority, and that my decision is binding. And he said, sure, you'll never be able to do it with my ladies, off you go. So he gathered the ladies, and the king had 2 favorite wives, so he divided them into 2 groups, and he took the favorite wife of the king, and he put them in charge of one group, and the second favorite he put in charge of another group. And then he said, now, you will give orders, but I don't give you orders by mouth. I give you orders by signs. I will use a drum. Now you must listen carefully, because this is an allegory. I will give you a drum. Now, it works very simple. If the drum beats once, you will all, in harmony, turn to the right. If the drum beats twice, you will all, in harmony, turn to the left. If it beats 3 times, you will turn all the way around and face the other way. Do we all understand each other? Yes, we do. Giggle, giggle. He says, let's try it. So he beats the drum. Boom. And they go all over, giggling and laughing. He says, let's try that again. And he goes through the ritual. He beats the drum once, he beats the drum twice, he beats the drum 3 times, and there's total disarray and disharmony. So he says, perhaps I did not make myself clear. Let me explain this to you again. And he explains it meticulously in many, many forms so that they cannot possibly misunderstand it. And then he says, let's do it again. If the drum beats once, you turn to the right. All at the same time in harmony, etc. So he beats the drum. And they turn, and the one giggles, and the other one does this, and the other does this. Terrible disaster. Eventually he says, I don't think I've made myself clear. Let me explain this to you nicely again. So he goes through the whole process, explains it to them, asks them whether they all understand. They say, yes, they understand. And he goes through the same ritual with the same disastrous results. And then he says, fine. You know what you must do. You refuse to do it. And because you refuse to do it, that is insubordination. And the penalty for insubordination is death. And so, the 2 leading ladies, will you come forward? Because you are now going to suffer the death penalty. And some people see that he's serious. So they run to the king of Wu and they say, King Wu, he's going to kill your wives. So he sends an order. This is the king of Wu. He sends an order. You will not touch my favorite wives. You will not do it. And Sun Tzu says, I have been given absolute authority. And he takes his sword and he chops both of their heads off. And he has them taken away. And he chooses 2 ladies out of each group and say, you come stand in the front here, and you're going to stand in front of this group. Now let me explain the ritual to you again. And he explains it to them perfectly. And then he says, when the drum beats once, you'll turn to the right. If it beats twice, you would turn to the left. If it turns 3 times, you turn all the way around. You understand? And he says, let's try that. Boom. What do you think happened? Absolute, perfect obedience. And he went through the ritual, and the king was devastated. His favorite wives were dead. So he decided to ban Sun Tzu and told him, go away, I don't want you. Eventually, the situation became so bad in his kingdom that he had no choice. And so he summoned Sun Tzu to come and take over the generalship of his nation. And the general became world famous. And he conquered all those lands back and gave them all back to the king of Wu. What are we talking about here? We're talking about Catholicism and Protestantism. We're talking about the King of Wu, who happens to be the Pope. And we're talking about Sun Tzu, who happens to be the general, with absolute authority. Now let's have a look at what his strategy would be in the art of war. And we're going to look at some of the slides and see where they lead us. He has a number of plans and he divides them into categories. The first one is laying plans. I've just taken some of the highlights. Point 18 is all warfare is based on deception. By the way, is that biblical? Did Christ use deception in his war against Lucifer? Yes or no? No. So deception is a strategy which you will not find with God. It's the strategy that you will find with the enemy of God. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out bait to entice the enemy. Feign disorder. Crush him. If he is taking his ease, give him no rest. If his forces are united, separate them. Excuse me, how many Protestant groups were there? A handful. How many are there now? Over 33,000. Attack him when he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. And then he says in point 26, now the general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple. Here the battle is fought. I have a question. Do generals have temples or do they have forts? Garrisons, whatever. They don't have temples. A temple is a place of sacrificial offering. So this is no ordinary general. This is a priest general. And the only priest generals that we have in the world, we will find them in the Jesuits today, and we will find them in the Knights of Malta. Those are priest generals. And the ultimate general of them all is the Jesuit general. So he sits in his temple and he makes plans. Now, how do you wage war? A wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy. 1 cartload of the enemy's provisions is equivalent to 20 of one's own. Don't use your own resources. Use those of the enemy. And likewise, a single pickle of the provender is equivalent to 20 from one's own store. In order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their reward. Therefore, in chariot fighting, when 10 or more chariots have been taken, those should be rewarded who took the first. Our own flags should be substituted for those of the enemy, and the chariots mingled and used in conjunction with ours. The captured soldiers should be kindly treated and kept. This is called using the conquered foe to augment one's own strength. This is a brilliant strategy. And if you think of it in terms of the spiritual war, then it seems obvious to me who wrote this. Now the general is the bulwark of the state. If the bulwark is complete at all points, the state will be strong. If it is defective, the state will be weak. Thus, there are some points which are essential to victory. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. And he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit through all its ranks. Absolute obedience to the superior general. No deviation of thought. Loyola wrote, even if God gave you a dog as a general, you will not for one moment hesitate to obey him. He will win who prepared himself, waits to take the enemy unprepared, and he will win whose military capacity. He will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. Now, that's an amazing statement. Tactical disposition. Sun Tzu said, the good fighters of old put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. You must get the enemy to be complacent. You must get the enemy to be relaxed, and then you defeat him. His victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage. That's an amazing statement, because whenever a worldly general wins a victory, everybody knows about him. Rommel was famous in Germany. Montgomery was famous in England. The generals that won, they were famous. But this general, his victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage, because nobody even hears his voice. All you hear is the tap of a drum. You don't know who's tapping the drum. He's doing it quietly. He wins his battles by making no mistakes. Please note that this is written just before 1798. Sun Tzu said, the control of a large force is the same principle as the control of a few men. It's merely a question of dividing up their numbers. Fighting with a large army under command is nowise different from fighting with a small one, so it doesn't matter. It's all about strategy. You must hold out bait. A clever combatant looks for the effect of combined energy and does not require too much from individuals. It has to be a team. There has to be an army, but nobody may know that it's there. Sun Tzu said, whoever is first in the field, please note this, and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. You want to be there first. You don't want to be there last. You don't want the Protestants to start Protestant America. You want to be there first. You want to be there first. You want to make them think they started it, when in actual fact, you started it. Oh, divine art of subtlety and secrecy. What did Jesus say about secrecy? I have done nothing in secret. Nothing. Nothing. Oh, divine art of subtlety and secrecy. Sun Tzu said in war, the general receives his command from the sovereign. Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night. And when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. Nobody must know what you're doing. There are roads which must not be followed, armies which must not be attacked, towns which must be besieged, positions which must not be contested. Now listen carefully. Commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed. So who's in control, the sovereign or the general? If he listens to the commands of the sovereign, if it suits him, but some commands he refuses to obey, does his own thing, then, well, that can only be a very special general who nobody knows about. There are 5 dangerous faults which may affect the general: recklessness, etc., cowardice. Well, that's not so serious. The army on the march. If soldiers are punished before they have grown attached to you, they will not prove submissive. Therefore, soldiers must be treated in the first instance with humanity, but kept under control by means of iron discipline. Fascinating stuff. Terrain. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even if at the ruler's bidding. So here is a general which is totally unlike any human political general. Totally unlike. This is a different general. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of his kingdom. You might look as if you've been defeated, but it might be a strategic loss. Then it gets even more fascinating as we go on, the 9 situations. It is the business of the general to be quiet and thus ensure secrecy. Upright and just and thus maintain order. He must be able to mystify his officers and men. Listen carefully. He must be able to mystify his officers and men by false reports and appearances, and thus keep them in total ignorance. This is interesting. So amongst his own ranks, there can be people that have no idea of what the ultimate strategy is, except that when they hear the sound of the drum, they will turn in unison. He carries his men deep into hostile territory before he shows his hand. When invading hostile territory, the general principle is that penetrating deeply brings cohesion. Penetrating but a short way means dispersion. Success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose, by persistently hanging on the enemy's flanks. Will he leave his enemy alone? Never. And will he press an advantage? When fire breaks out inside the enemy's camp, respond at once with an attack from outside. Relentless, relentless. Now this one I found particularly interesting. The use of spies. There are all kinds of spies. There are local spies, inward spies, converted spies, doomed spies, surviving spies. Let's look at these interesting categories. When these 5 kinds of spies are all at work, none can discover the secret system. This is called divine manipulation of the threads. Are you getting an interesting vibe here? It is the sovereign's most precious faculty. Having local spies, meaning employing the service of inhabitants of the district. So there where you are, you have your local spies. Wherever you go, you have a local spy. Having inward spies is making use of officials of the enemy. Converted spies, getting hold of the enemy's spies and using them for your own purposes. And then you have doomed spies, doing certain things openly for purposes of deception, and allowing our spies to know of them and report them to the enemy. Can you believe that? That you will sacrifice your own people for the sake of victory? So if one of your own is given a position or a job to do, which is diametrically opposed to what the government is saying in that area, all the people, you have your own people expose them to the government and endear yourself to the government, even if it means the death of your spy. And then you have surviving spies. Finally are those who bring back news from the enemy's camp. Hence it is that which none of the whole army are more intimate relations to be maintained than with spies. None should be more liberally rewarded. In no other business should greater secrecy be preserved. Fascinating stuff. The enemy spies who have come to spy on us must be sought out, tempted with bribes, led away, comfortably housed. Thus they will become converted spies and available for our service. This is how the Jesuit general thinks and operates. You cannot understand his machinations, and you will never unravel the mystery if you do not have prophecy to rely on. You'll never unravel the mystery. That's why there's so much confusion. Who's the enemy? Nobody even knows that there is an enemy. It is through the information brought by the converted spy that we are able to acquire and employ local and inward spies. It is owing to his information again that we can cause the doomed spy to carry false tidings to the enemy. Lastly, is his bias information that the surviving spy can be used on appointed occasions. So spies are everywhere. So deception, deception, deception is the name of the game. This book was published under the generalship of General Ricci. So he understood. He probably wrote it.